So, who was the second emperor of Rome, Tiberius? Was he a reluctant but, a really effective administrator who kept the empire safe and prosperous? Or was he a paranoid, cruel tyrant who unleashed a reign of terror from his own private island of debauchery? For 2,000 years, history just hasn't been able to make up its mind. Okay, let's dive into this historical cold case.
And right out of the gate, you can see the problem. Our ancient sources give us two completely different men. On one hand, you've got the historian Tacitus, who paints this picture of jealousy and an insatiable lust for power. But on the other hand, there's Velleius Paterculus, a soldier who actually served under Tiberius, who writes that things like justice, fairness, and hard work were all brought back under his rule. So, who are we supposed to believe here?
To get to the bottom of this, we're going to follow the evidence, piece by piece. First, we'll tackle the enigma of our conflicting witnesses. Then we'll look at his really shaky start as emperor and the dangerous mutinies he had to deal with. We'll explore his most important relationships, his infamous retreat to Capri, the so-called terror of the treason trials, and finally, we'll try to deliver our own verdict on this really complicated Roman emperor.
Look, to solve any historical mystery, the first thing you have to do is question your witnesses. And in the case of Tiberius, as we're about to see, our main witnesses couldn't be more polarized. Each one had their own agenda, and that shapes everything they tell us.
So our main accusers are Tacitus and Suetonius. Tacitus was a senator, writing about 80 years after Tiberius died, and he had a deep mistrust of the whole imperial system. Suetonius was an archivist who just loved juicy, scandalous gossip. And our main character witness for the defense? That's Velleius Paterculus, a soldier and a contemporary who saw Tiberius as this ideal commander. Three guys, three very, very different perspectives.
All right, let's go back to the beginning of his reign in AD 14. This was not a smooth transfer of power. Not even close. Tiberius, the stepson of the now godlike Augustus, inherited an empire that was, right from day one, basically on the verge of chaos.
I mean, within weeks of Augustus's death, Tiberius isn't just dealing with political gains back in Rome, he's facing these massive, violent mutinies out on the frontiers in Pannonia and Germany. We're talking about entire legions rising up, demanding better pay, shorter service. The very stability of the empire is hanging by a thread.
And how did Tiberius react to becoming emperor? With extreme hesitation. He played this weird game of will he, won't he with the Senate, refusing the official title of emperor. Now, our hostile sources, they didn't see this as humility. Oh no, they saw it as cynical political theater. As the historian Suetonius tells it, one senator even taunted him, pointing out that his reluctance was kind of phony, since he'd, already taken command of the guards.
Every good political thriller has a cast of complex characters, and Tiberius's reign is no exception. His story is really dominated by two men, his wildly popular nephew, Germanicus, and his trusted and frankly terrifyingly ambitious deputy, Sejanus.
On one side, you have Germanicus. He was the son of Tiberius's beloved brother, the charismatic, universally adored heir apparent, the Golden Boy. On the other side, you've got Lucius Aelius Sejanus, the prefect of the Praetorian Guard, a guy who became, for a time, the second most powerful person in all of Rome. These two relationships would end up defining Tiberius's reign and ultimately his legacy.
So, first, let's look at Germanicus. He was out in Germany winning these huge victories, avenging a humiliating Roman defeat. But then Tiberius recalled him. Why? Well, according to Tacitus, the motive was simple and ugly: jealousy. Later on, Germanicus was sent to the east, where he died under some really mysterious circumstances, actually believing he'd been poisoned. And the finger of suspicion, whether it's fair or not, has always pointed right back towards Tiberius.
Now what about Sejanus? To Tacitus, he was this master manipulator with an unbounded lust for power, a man who seduced Tiberius's daughter-in-law and even poisoned his son. But then you have Velleius, the soldier who served with Tiberius, and he saw an outstanding administrator, a loyal partner helping Tiberius with the huge burdens of running an empire. Of course, Tiberius eventually discovered Sejanus was plotting against him and had him executed, but the damage to his own reputation was immense.
Then, in AD 26, Tiberius did something completely unprecedented. He packed up, left Rome, and retired to the island of Capri, never to return. And this, right here, is where his historical image transforms from a grim, unpopular ruler into a monstrous recluse.
And the accusations, well, they were truly depraved. Suetonius fills his biography with these lurid tales of sexual extravagance, torture, and cruelty, claiming Tiberius turned the entire island into his personal twisted playground. I mean, these are the stories that have defined Tiberius in the popular imagination for centuries.
But hold on a second. Even the hostile Tacitus offers up some more plausible reasons for why he left. Was he trying to escape the political scheming of Sejanus? Or maybe even the domineering influence of his own mother, Livia? Tacitus also notes that Tiberius was old, tall, stooped, bald, and his face was covered in sores. Maybe he simply wanted to hide from the public gaze.
And here we see the central contradiction of his reign. While Suetonius is painting this picture of a depraved retiree, even the hostile Tacitus has to admit that from Capri, Tiberius was still a very effective administrator. He made sure the provinces were governed well, he listened to their complaints, and he kept the machinery of the state running smoothly. He once wrote to a governor who suggested raising taxes, "A good shepherd shears his flock, he does not flay them."
Now, after the fall of Sejanus in AD 31, our hostile sources claim Tiberius's paranoia just exploded, unleashing a bloody reign of terror back in Rome through the use of treason trials. But was it really a reign of terror?
To understand what happened, we need to look at the law itself. Maiestas, or treason, had been expanded under Augustus to include not just actions against the state, but also slander against the emperor. This basically created a weapon that could be used by informers, who were rewarded with a chunk of the convicted person's property. The picture painted by writers like Seneca is just terrifying. A world where a drunken conversation or a misplaced joke could lead to your execution, where informers were lurking everywhere, and, as he puts it, a kind of national madness took hold. Tacitus echoes this, describing piles of executed bodies just left out on public display.
But what happens if we set aside the rhetoric and actually look at the numbers? A careful study of Tacitus's own work, the very source that paints this grim picture, reveals something very different. Over a reign of 23 years, there were a total of 52 charges of treason brought to trial. 52. That's just over 2 per year.
And the numbers get even more interesting when you break them down. Of those 52 charges, only 12 actually resulted in a guilty verdict and an execution. And Tiberius himself only directly ordered 8 of those. Now, any innocent victim is a tragedy, for sure, but this is hardly the national madness or daily bloodbath that the sources describe. The data suggests the terror was more in the fear than in the reality. So, we've reviewed the evidence, the shaky accession, the powerful rivals, the scandalous retreat, the feared treason trials. We've heard from the prosecution, and we've heard from the defense. How in the world do we judge Tiberius?
Maybe the most insightful verdict comes from his greatest critic, Tacitus himself. He didn't see Tiberius as some simple monster, but as a man whose character changed, or maybe devolved over time. He suggests that for years, Tiberius concealed his true nature, but after the deaths of his heirs, his mother, and his deputy Sejanus, all the restraints were gone. And only then, Tacitus argues, did his true, cruel personality finally emerge.
Ultimately, the case of Tiberius leaves us with way more questions than answers. Was he a good administrator who was just warped by tragedy and paranoia? Or was he a tyrant whose true nature was only revealed with time? It forces us to ask a much bigger question. When our primary witnesses give us such wildly different stories, how can we ever truly know the past?